Now, without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to first introduce Justin, who'll be joining us from Liberty Mutual. Justin Stone is the Senior Director of Secure DevOps Platforms at Liberty Mutual, with over 20 years of infrastructure and engineering experience. Justin and his team support application teams looking to advance their cloud journey at Liberty and improve overall developer experience. He's currently focused on pipelines and platforms that enable movement and shape to where Liberty is going next.
Thanks, Teresa, for the warm introduction. I'm really excited to talk today about the topic. It's one myself and my team are pretty passionate about. Add a little bit more to that. I've been at Liberty for about the past 17 years, and I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I've had the extreme privilege of both seeing the change happen at Liberty Mutual over the last couple of years and participating as a change agent there. Just to give you a little bit of background on Liberty Mutual, our size and scale. We're a 108-year-old company. We employ more than 45,000 employees around 29 countries and have a technology team of around 5,000 employees. Our technology teams oversee 4,000 plus business applications, responsible for really growing and supporting our business, our customers, and our employees.
Wow, Justin, that's a pretty serious scale. You have almost as many applications as you do technologists, so that definitely is a challenge. So let's get started. When an organization decides to go after DevOps, you're often trying to address a challenge that you're currently facing, right? So what was the challenge that Liberty Mutual was facing as an organization that made you decide to invest in the DevOps culture? And why did you think it would help you face these challenges better?
Yeah, it was a combination of things, right? So scale, speed, agility, adaptability, those are really the hallmarks of what make companies successful. Liberty Mutual is no exception there. We decided to make take some bold actions and make some bold moves on some things about 5 years ago. So we really went all in on a public cloud adoption strategy, having started our public cloud journey about 2 years prior to that. In order to be successful at that, we really had some transformational things that we wanted to take on. We knew we also had to go through an agile transformation and partner with our business. And we knew in order to be successful doing agile software development in the public cloud, we had to lean in heavily to DevOps as a culture and as a change agent for our developers and engineers across the globe. So with the cloud, we wanted fully empowered development teams that could be nimble and agile as they were exploring and implementing newer technologies and taking on new challenges. Our old waterfall and toss over the wall approach to operations was going to really hold us back. We'd seen that in the years prior, and we needed to make sure that we had all of the things in place, the right platforms and capabilities, so that our teams wouldn't get held up with classically how we ran the ops.
Awesome. So you had a big, gnarly, ambitious goal, and thought DevOps would help you break down those silos and be more successful at it. That absolutely makes sense. Now, getting started is hard, right? Especially when you're talking about an organization and a scale, and quite honestly, the history that you all have, right? So when we say you eat an elephant one bite at a time, and taking those first couple bites can be pretty intimidating on where to even start. So how did you get started? What did you focus on?
Yeah, I would say first, like anyone else, we probably took too big of a bite out of the gate, right? And had to take a couple steps back and really understand where to go next. One of the things that we realized is we had some pretty mature teams running platforms internal to Liberty Mutual. So we went and talked to them. We wanted to understand what was working well for them at Liberty Mutual and what some of the key challenges were. What were those things that we needed to go after next to make sure as other teams were learning and educating themselves and getting better at this, we could help accelerate that. We talked to external teams as well. What was happening in the industry? What was happening in financial services companies? Who was doing well at this? We tried to rally around consistent tooling and education around that. We engaged some of the core teams that were sitting between development and operations teams to understand what role they were playing historically to soften the edges between doing net new development and operating that development ecosystem. We read a lot of books, right? We rallied around things like Accelerate. We rallied around DORA metrics. I think the metrics were really key to get people excited about what was possible and also based on where we were at. So did a lot of book clubs, did some things like that. I personally walked around with the Accelerate book and handed it out anytime I had conversations like this with some of my peers. And as I got further along in that, I'd come to find out that half the time they'd already read it. And then next year they generally said, have you read this yet? And so that was really important to our journey as well as rallying around that and really just educating ourselves on what good could be and understanding we had a long way to go to get there.
Yeah, I think that's a common challenge when you've got an organization as big as you are, right? Even getting people to agree on definitions, agree on KPIs, what does success look like, and everything. And I love the idea of, you talked to me about a book club, getting people together to not only read the book, but to actually discuss the book. Why do you think that was, I thought that was a really innovative way to do this. Why do you think that was particularly valuable for you all?
It was valuable because we got to rally around industry standard terminology and industry standard approaches, not what does this mean specifically at Liberty Mutual. And so words have meanings, and the books got really detailed on what those words meant. And we had to have, productive and constructive conversations about how to implement that at Liberty. So for me, that consistent base level education so we could take it to the next step was really important. Otherwise, we were on different wavelengths of what we were talking about.
And, we talk, you and I were talking before about this. There's a lot of this, like, not built here. Engineers love to build things, whether it's definitions, processes, tools, and all of that. How did you try to balance, putting your stamp on, DevOps, Agile, and everything with actually, leveraging, the learnings and the knowledge of the folks that have gone before you?
Yeah, so it was a combination of things. One, we really saw that parts of the organization were just getting after it and getting started on their journey, which meant they were going in several different directions. I think we had some centralized support from our senior leadership to share that information back and really rally around what was good enough for the organization, how could we as an enterprise rally around some of these concepts, and where did we need to be different? Because there is still a need in certain business units with different challenges to be slightly different on where you're at in your maturity curve on the technologies and platforms that you're using. But we rallied around some things. We rallied around those consistent platforms and opportunities to make sure that our developers could be successful no matter which part of the organization they worked in. And when we did see those gaps, we worked really hard to try to shore them up and are still working towards that, right? So this is an ongoing journey that we're still heavily involved in and heavily investing in, and making sure that our developers and engineers are as empowered as they can be to get their jobs done.
Awesome. So you've been on this journey, right? What's gone smoothly? And then maybe what's been more challenging than you anticipated?
I think the smoothest part of this was really the senior leader buy-in, right? From the moment we said this is what we needed to be successful in combination with our agile transformation and our public cloud journey, that senior level buy-in of we're going to change the culture of how we engineer things, on what excellent engineering is and how DevOps is going to help that. So that's been fantastic from the start. I think the challenging piece was how to do it more consistently. And kind of, what I mentioned a minute ago on each of the teams kind of getting started, the excitement that comes out of these things where you get to do new. We went a couple of different directions. And over time, we were able to kind of bring some of those back in. And understanding that, we could get better together, I think was a key part of it. But yeah, I can't emphasize enough, the smooth part was really understanding the fact that we had to do this. This had to be part of who we were going forward in order for us to be successful.
Were you surprised how getting that executive buy-in, were you surprised on how smoothly that went? Did you expect, having to work at it more?
I'm not surprised by it. We've got a fantastic senior executive leadership team in technology at Liberty Mutual who's really bold about what we're doing and where we're going. So for them to be visionary and out in front of this, and also the fact that they were listening to our engineers who were already doing this. So it's not like ideation, I've got an idea. It's like what's working in the ground level, what's going well. And so we were hearing that. You're seeing teams be successful practicing it. So it's kind of that coming together, right? What our senior leaders were seeing and what good looked like, what our engineers were practicing and what good looked like. So it was a really natural fit, and that's pretty common and consistent across Liberty.
Awesome. So you're in the transformation now, right? The ship's turning, you're living this day to day, right? Where are you now? Do you feel like you are in the transformation?
I mean, we're definitely still transforming. I think it's an ongoing process, right? We've centralized a lot of the enablement tools and platforms and capabilities that teams need to be successful that support the DevOps culture and the mindset. We've consolidated a lot of the many duplicative solutions that are in the space. So because we've acquired companies over the years and everybody had their own tooling and each of the markets in Liberty Mutual had their own tooling, we had a lot of duplicative solutions there, right? So same type of tool installed 3 different ways, competing technologies from different vendors and providers. So consolidating that really allowed us to focus on accelerating what was next, like what's the next gap. I think along the way, we've really learned that we need to be a bit bolder on where we could have gotten started and how to push further. And really, it's just continual education, awareness, and partnership that's critical to anything that we're doing to be successful. That ongoing feedback loop, what's working, what's not working, right? We engage with the development community and the engineering community on what impediments are out there, and we listen to that. We have, net promoter score internally, and we're listening to that. These feedback loops have really allowed us to figure out what's next and how we do better. There's always going to be a better, and I think the teams are working really hard to make that happen. But it only happens with the engagement and the contributions from the community itself. And our engineers and developers are awesome, and they really help us be successful from how we operate the platforms that make their lives easier.
Wow, it sounds like you have a really good community already happening there, and a great feedback loop and leadership who actually listens. I think that's before you get into process and tools and technology, that's a really big, important thing to have in the organization. And it sounds like you guys have already had that, which has definitely been beneficial to your success.
Yeah, 100%. It's the critical factor, right? Having the right talent, the right level of engagement, the right candid conversations, and aligning around what good looks like and at times what done looks like. And we've had a lot of those conversations. Some of those have been hard and some of those have been really easy. And it's a combination of things, and the persistence is just keep moving and trying to get better together.
So now that we're talking about community and collaboration, let's talk about what challenges led you to select and adopt Stack Overflow for Teams, and how has it helped your organization solve some of these challenges?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that I didn't call out earlier was just knowledge management, right? How we handle knowledge management, where to go to find something, how to engage a community, how to really understand. So we were seeing patterns where we had subject matter experts in platform teams and subject matter experts across the organization. They were getting asked a lot of the same types of questions consistently in a multitude of different channels, right? That could be through, IM, a phone call, a drive-by, internal messaging, et cetera. And they were answering those time and time and time again. And so what we found was we needed an ability and a technology that allowed us to ask questions and get answers and share that knowledge out more broadly. And that's where the Stack Overflow for Teams really came in and helped us get started on that journey. We have a large development community, like we mentioned earlier, that leverages Stack Overflow externally quite heavily. And we thought, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea to have a searchability for internal things at Liberty and also external at the same time? And Stack Overflow for Teams really helps that. We're seeing a lot of engagement from the community with regards to both asking questions consistently out there instead of using some of the other channels that we have, and also supportability from the platform teams, because they're already seeing this drive down tickets and Q&A and problems that we have that's consuming their time. So they answer a question once, and 10, 20, 30, 40 people can find the response to that. And it really allows our entry-level engineers to find the answers they want without maybe bothering a subject matter expert, or even if they don't know who that is, right? They might find that through the Q&A capability from Stack Overflow, so that if it doesn't quite answer their question, they can follow up on that. What we're also really seeing, and it's an expectation that I didn't have initially, was the community is guiding the answer. And so even if we have a subject matter expert or a leader in a platform team, that doesn't mean that's always the right answer. And so we're seeing the community come back and contribute answers that really shift the underlying thinking of what that answer should be and what that difference is. It also gives us access to what questions are being asked, how those are being tagged, so that we can queue up the right teams for the next chunk of workload that's coming that maybe we didn't expect. So we focused on some of the areas that we knew we had some service desk tickets that were coming in too often, or internal messaging conversations that were pretty active. And that's been a really helpful driver right out of the gate for us.
Yeah, I think there's several things you just said there that resonated. We're always talking about the product internally. I think, the subject matter experts, right? I think as leaders in engineering, we're always worried about burning those folks out, but by constantly sharing their knowledge as opposed to getting to do their own learning and growing and getting to work on their own projects, right? And keeping those folks around, and how do you scale those SMEs? I think the other thing another thing you said was about the, more, junior tenured folks, right? Sometimes they're afraid to ask questions. They don't want to look like they don't know what's going on. And so they may hold back and get stuck, but not tell anyone they're getting stuck and not ask those questions. And so if there's a way they can do it without highlighting what they don't know, there's a lot of value in that, into helping those folks grow and remove their own barriers, right?
Yeah, we're 100% seeing that outcome as well. I think the other thing we're seeing is just the diversity in thought in the answers. So where previously you'd go to the subject matter expert or the team and constantly going back to the same individuals, and by asking the question of the community, we're seeing a response from the community, which brings in a whole lot of diverse thought, perspective, and really drives the conversation in a much different way than if you constantly and consistently go back to the same person time and time and time again. So the amount of thought that is brought up, the conversations outside of the product about how to get better, what's next, or adding things to the backlog of these different products that we're running internally has been super empowering and super thoughtful with regards to how the team's been handling it. So we're seeing a lot of positives that we weren't expecting out of the gate.
Yeah, that's awesome. We talk a lot about, when I talk about why Stack Overflow, like the public platform succeeds, and, I think you've highlighted why it succeeds internally, is that builders, the builders of technology write documentation, right? And they try and be comprehensive, but they're also writing from the builder's perspective. And to your point about crowdsourcing answers and evolving, right, and curating answers from the community, other users who may be further along than the user asking the question may actually be able to give an answer that actually is more applicable or more useful to it. And so that collaboration and that evolution of the right answer is super powerful in that, how quickly can we get these folks unblocked?
Yeah, we have amazing builders at Liberty Mutual, right? We've got ridiculous talent that's building great things, and they do document it. And we have these generators and these software accelerators that you can find, and you can go to the marketplace and get all these information of all the things. You're still going to have a question. You still need to understand, is this going to work for my solution? And what this allows us to do is ask that question broadly and openly versus in a closed channel, in a closed message loop. And then the public can take advantage of it, right? The internal Liberty Mutual public can take advantage of that. So maybe if you were embarrassed about asking that type of question, you can search. Someone else has probably ran into that. Someone else probably had that question, and you don't have to ask. Or you can then come in and say, hey, I had that question too. You're not the only one that had that question. So maybe the person that asked didn't feel confident about it. And we're seeing that too, like people raising their hand and saying, yeah, me too. How can we work together to solve this? And that's really the power of it. And just the data that we can get out of the platform too is really helpful in understanding where we're going next and what some of those gaps are. But it's the combination of it with a bunch of the other investments that we're making internally that really help us out and make the community that much more lively and that much more engaged and willing to help each other.
That's awesome. So one last question from me before we go over to from the audience. I always love to ask these sort of questions while you're a good ways through a journey. If you could go back to your past self, or anyone who's hasn't started the DevOps transformation or is early in it, what advice would you give yourself for these folks to help make the journey a little easier?
That's a tough one. I guess maybe I would whisper in my ear 5 or 7 years ago and just let myself know that it'll be worth it. Trust the process. It's going to be worth it. It's going to pay off. Teams are going to buy in. It's going to add value to the organization. This is real. This is what we need to do. I think the other piece of advice for those that, haven't gotten started or just getting started, get started. You have to start. You're not going to get it right. You're going to learn some lessons. You're going to evolve. I think you have to be open to change and comfortable that your initial iterations, your initial interactions probably aren't going to get it right. You're probably going to need to keep moving and evolving and growing. You're going to need to listen to your product teams about what's working and what's not. You're going to listen to your customers, what's working and what's not. You might see a thing, historically speaking, that makes the most sense for you to invest in on your DevOps journey. That might not be the thing that your customer, your business partner needs you to invest in. So having those open, candid conversations are really key. And I think the other is like leverage the data and metrics that exist, right? They make it easier to tell the story. They make it easier to talk about maturity. They make it easier to really rally around what's important. Heavily recommend reading the Accelerate book, rallying around the DORA metrics. That's been huge for our success. But get started, just get started. I think that's the most important message I think that I can get out the door is start your journey if you haven't yet. And if you're already started, double down on it, do more.
Awesome. So let's get started. Let's go to some audience Q&A. I think this is an interesting one. How did you get started on approaching peers in the industry, right? I think folks are mostly willing to share, but sometimes that how do you approach them? How do you reach out to them? I think you guys were really successful. You were talking that you brought in a lot of guest speakers and talked to a lot of folks. What was your sort of strategy there?
Part of it was, who did we think was good at engineering, right? Who were some of the partners we worked with that we really respected from an engineering talent perspective, and not only from a talent, but how they got their jobs done, right? How they built things, how they work things. And so we partnered with some of the key vendors we had at the time that were good at that, that provided platforms for us that allowed us to be better at that. And just having open conversations, sitting in a room together, being very candid about what works and what doesn't. Our first forays into pair programming and things like that, like being in a lab type environment, right? Those really help teams overcome some of those barriers that we had previously, and just being open to being candid about what works and what doesn't. And so a lot of it, I'll give some credit to our internal teams who were already doing it, being willing to come and do workshops and share what they had learned and talk about what it meant. And generally we met the teams or had to meet the teams on where they were at. So, hey, if I'm just getting started on developing this type of thing with this technology, can you come help us get started? And so we saw a lot of progress on net new development and wrapping the mindset around that. We also saw a lot of adoption and buy-in on the modernization efforts that we were taking on as part of our public cloud journey. So anytime we had a new effort kicking off, we try to bring in expertise on how to build and think differently with that DevOps mindset. And that was really successful because it was hands-on education with the teams, hands-on feedback for the teams running the platforms that were enabling them to make sure that we were getting better so that they wouldn't get frustrated, or when they did, we were addressing that as consistently as we could.
Okay, I think that goes well into the next question, which is, how often did you get that feedback loop, and sort of how often did you get the feedback, and how long was the feedback loop that you had with the teams that you were supporting?
So it depends on the team. I'll give you the general, it depends, right? Some teams had engagements where you were in a lab environment with them week in and week out, and you were retroing every Friday or one day a week. Other teams we were touching base, once a month. And some teams we weren't touching base at all with. And so learning some of those lessons on who aren't you paying attention to, what can you do better to get that feedback from the engineering community. It's why we do things like send out developer surveys. It's why we have cabs with development communities. It's why we ask what we can do better. So we learned a lot of lessons about, maybe zeroing in on one audience too much and not the greater org. And teams were advancing one way or another, no matter how much care and feeding was going on there. And what we found were the teams that were, maybe we weren't talking to, were getting better at things that we weren't focused on. So the real positive that came out of that is we were able to take the things that other parts of the organization that were focused on and bring those in and talk about how do we now make these capabilities available for all. So that was both a negative for not talking to our customers as well as we should, and a positive for understanding they were tackling different challenges for different reasons, and bringing all those things together so that more developers and engineers could take advantage of the capabilities there. And that's ongoing, right? That difference between emergent, design and intentional architecture is an ongoing challenge, and one that makes it healthy in an environment that allows our teams to go out, try new things, and bring it back to the core when it makes the most sense.
So this one, I know you and I've talked a bit about, but what KPIs did you find useful in tracking your DevOps journey?
Yeah, I think I've got an operational background by nature, right? Coming up through infrastructure and ops throughout my career. For me, MTTR was really a big deal, like making sure that we could track that as more developers were using pipelines and leveraging good DevOps approaches to doing their work, we were seeing MTTR go down, right? That was a very real thing. And honestly, early on in our DevOps journey, MTTR was going up. We were breaking things more. We didn't quite know as much about how to recover it, so we saw bubbles. And as we were maturing, we saw MTTR come down, and we've made a huge amount of progress over the last couple of years in our confidence in the numbers with MTTR. I think that's the other piece, is having confidence in it. So, when it comes to lead time, making sure that we understand how we can go from ideation to getting code out the door to provide that feedback loop on our minimal viable product, on whatever the business is looking for, seeing those numbers come down over time. We're an organization that went from, one point in time quarterly releases to monthly releases to weekly releases. We have a lot of teams that are very active in deploying production code for their business applications daily. And so that's a really big learning curve over time on how to do that efficiently and how to leverage all the proper approaches to making that happen. So tracking those things over time has been really, really impactful. But I think a lot of the history from my perspective is the end result is, if things break, because they're going to break, can we recover quickly? And DevOps and our whole approach around it has fully empowered us to recover quickly when we break things.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. I think, something I always talk about with engineers and engineering leaders about is, we love KPIs, but I always make the team take a step back and say, what does success look like, right? What are the outcomes we want? And then what KPIs go along with those? Because, to your point, every organization is looking for something slightly different. Like, why do they go down the DevOps journey? What challenges, what problems are they trying to solve look like? Because we do it for different reasons. It may have a lot of overlap, but we do it for different reasons. And so I think taking those KPIs back to business and technology outcomes is super important.
Yeah, maybe to expand on that a little bit, right? The speed, stability, and cost effective, right? Those are the three major things. And depending on where the team's at, where the business is at, you focus on different things for different reasons, but it ties back to those three things. And not to beat the DORA metrics, I just think the DORA metrics allow for you to have that constructive conversation that ties back to those three things, as well as the work that the teams are doing. And just a little bit more, it's about each of the teams on their maturity with the work they're doing, with the product they're doing. So it's hard not to want to compare and contrast across all teams as a overlap. You really have to focus on where's that team and where's that product, and just want to hit on that to make sure that no one thinks you gotta apply it across the board and hold everyone to the same standard. I think it's all about getting better and getting better based on that baseline and what your business really needs out of it.
Nope, I completely agree with that. Prioritization. We can't boil the ocean, right?
We try at times.
So we've got two questions here that I think basically touch on the same thing, which is, looking for pieces of advice on promoting engagement and utilization for adopting Stack Overflow, right? And getting engineers engaged, right? Where it's not just only a handful of folks, doing most of the work.
Yeah, I think what we saw success in is I think like anything else, we started a pilot and we did a proof of value on that pilot. And we got some of the more vocal members of our community that, either were already answering questions in the various channels that were going on, or were asking a lot of the questions. And so we started with a motivated group, right? And I think that was really key. I think with these types of technologies, you have to be too cautious to not say, hey, we've got all this motivation out of the gate and all this energy, and then it falls off. So we really had to make sure that we were highlighting the value we were getting out of it and highlighting it to the teams that were putting the value in. So how do we make sure that the team that's supporting, say, our software delivery platform is happy about the results. Well, do they see the ticketing queues go down as part of that? Do they see the types of questions they're being asked, kind of increase in a level of complexity? Are they freeing up some time to tackle the next thing? And tying that back and forth, I think, really helps. The other thing were constant reminders, right? Like, instead of answering the question in one of the multiple channels we have, having those integrations back, from Slack or otherwise into Stack Overflow for Teams, you could point people back and say, ask a question there. You could have them search the questions from there and make it known. And we did some consistency there out of the gate with the first couple of platform teams that we went on. And those are big platforms with large audiences. So that communication really helped. We also talked about this, pretty broadly on the fact that we're making this investment. We would like people to participate, but please give us the feedback on if it's not meeting your needs. And we're still in that, right? We're still in that. Is this still working for us? Is this something that we're going forward with? And right now, all the things are saying yes, because the community's active and engaged, and all the numbers are telling us so as well. So for me, it's about just constant asking and getting feedback on, are the people that are participating getting value out of it? Are their team members getting value out of it? Are their customers getting value out of it?
I like this next question. In organizations that are being transformed to DevOps, right? You need to work with a group of people that have been working in a different way previously, right? And everyone's saying you need to change the mindset of these folks to be able to work in, DevOps mode. What have you done in this area? Maybe could you provide a real life example of how you actually saw that mindset change, maybe in a team or a group?
I think, without getting too far into the specifics, a couple years back, we built a brand new thing from the ground up, from non-existent business capability to production deployed in the market. And from the get-go on that, we said this was going to be in the public cloud, built in an agile manner with DevOps at the core, which meant that team was fully empowered, like full scale, fully empowered to build, deploy, run, and manage what they needed. And they were able to move much more swiftly than anything else at the time. And the highlight of that big program, big running, that example was used consistently for why DevOps was important, why public cloud was important, and why all of those combined with an agile transformation really helped them be successful, going from no solution to a completely, available production class setting market solution. So you got to rally around an investment, right? I think having the use cases that highlight the value are really, really important. So when I say just get started, you're going to have a team, you're going to have a business partner that wants to get rolling on something. How do you put it as part of that? How do you highlight the metrics and the data back as that effort's being successful? The way you're building and deploying that, the way you're managing that is part of that success. And so we did that in pockets around the company, and eventually you ended up knowing a team that was working that way, that got accolades for what they delivered, that really shined a light on it. And because of that, we saw people taking advantage of DevOps capabilities and approaches and cultural change in areas that you wouldn't expect, right? We've got, probably shine a light on it. We've got mainframe development going on right now at Liberty Mutual where they're using DevOps as a practice to do that. That wasn't something that I thought about a couple of years ago, but they saw the value of it. They saw the value of the approach of it. That team's been very successful, leveraging a lot of the practices and procedure in their daily life. And we're seeing that across the board, but it really started using greenfield, net new, cloud enabled, and we're seeing it permeate all throughout the environment and all manner of teams, database support teams, et cetera. So really pumped that people are taking the things and what works here, how can I take advantage of that? And it's really building up confidence. The teams are getting educated and aware of tools that they wouldn't have been familiar with before, of concepts that, maybe didn't apply before. How do you think about continuous integration and continuous delivery? And that's empowering because it sets up our teams to be successful at whatever they want to take on next, and allows them to move a little more laterally into different tools and technologies and be successful there too.
Awesome. So this question I thought was interesting too. How did you manage expectation from senior leadership around how fast the company would see value or benefit from this DevOps transformation, right? I always say managing expectations is a lot of my job in the day-to-day, managing up, managing down. But it's an investment we're making, right? In people, education, tools, changes, and sometimes we get slower before we get faster. So how did you manage those expectations and that messaging?
I think because everyone was on board with it being a true cultural change, a true change in approach, and we knew it was in combination with a couple of other transformational things. We knew it was a multi-year journey right out of the gate. I think that was pretty easy to come to, or at least it felt easy. Maybe I have revisionist history. Maybe it wasn't as easy as I think it was. But we did have some core, efforts going on across Liberty about how could we get better at these things? How could we get better at delivering sooner? How could we get better at, being more efficient? And those conversations led to the broader conversations about what could help. And we rallied around those, and everyone that I can recall being part of those conversations knew that it was a journey, knew it wasn't a quick fix, knew that there wasn't like a single technology you could buy that would make this happen, and knew that we had to really educate and empower our people and give them the runway and the tools and the training and the education and a little bit of leeway to be successful practicing it. And I think that was the biggest thing is like, let's get started. Let's start practicing this and let's see how we can get better. And every year, every quarter, every month, every week, we get feedback from the community on what we can do better next and how do we get better next. And we respond to that. We can't do all the things, right? There's always a list that's, way deep with all the things that we could do, but we try to major in the majors and get the things done that matter most to the community. Sometimes we hit it out of the park and other times we come up a little short, but either way, it's progress, and the team sees that progress. Senior leadership sees that progress and really sees the manner of the success that we're having based on some of the big things that we've done. And we've done a better job over the last 2 years, to be honest, on some of the things that we've done a lot better behind the scenes, right? So how well do we run some of our core platforms and some of the core infrastructure behind the scenes, right? The whole transformation of our, infrastructure engineering footprint and how everything is code, taking a lot of the DevOps practices that, we really pushed heavy with our software developers and engineers out of the gate, and making sure that we were doing that from an infrastructure perspective too. Like our infrastructure admins classically from a couple years ago are software developers now, right? They work in the same manner that our software engineers do. And that's the type of stuff that I think we've gotten a lot better at over the last couple of years. And then we do a better job highlighting, like, these are the reasons why we're more stable and we have a better response time to things and we're more efficient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just really proud of how the team's evolved and where we've applied the learnings from a DevOps perspective. But kind of circle back around to the initial point of the question, everyone knew it was a journey because it's a cultural change, and everyone knows that doesn't change overnight. That it requires, consistent care and feeding and work.
Well, Justin, I feel like you set me up for the sort of next two questions that I was sort of grouping together. It was like, how do you know when a team is hitting critical points and becoming, having more DevOps skills? And there was a particular question saying from a sysadmin, which I feel like is what you were just talking on, like, how do you get them started, right? In automating tasks, how do you get them to start to give them bite-sized, easy first steps of starting to develop those muscles that maybe they haven't?
Yeah, I think you give them a little bit of leeway and understand what they need. You ask them, right? What do you think you can do to automate this further? And it starts with that automation mentality. How do I make this easier? And you understand what technology they're working in, right? So, different technologies that we have within the platform can help with different situations. So are you trying to automate what you're doing from an infrastructure, like an IaaS perspective? And maybe it's how do we help from a CFT perspective, right? And how do we do that in a pipeline, right? How do we do that from source code, not from a GUI that they maybe are used to using? How do we take their knowledge on Perl scripting and some of the more classic automation and infrastructure and leverage that with other infrastructure orchestration technologies? And then how do we highlight that in front of other teams so other teams know that it's possible for them too? But a lot of what we've done to be successful is, we spun up an infrastructure engineering academy, right? We put in time and effort to take some of our sysadmins and other people who were interested in learning this, and we put them through a 6-week program to learn the skills and understand how to leverage pipelines and understand how to leverage the platforms we have so that they could go back into their job and apply those learnings with the things they already knew about the role they had previously. We've had a lot of success with that. We've had a lot of other internal training programs that just help level up the knowledge of what's available, as well as, the understanding of how to take advantage of what's available. So we've seen a lot of success out of that. And I think it's key for that, right? I think some people can learn on their own and go find it. So having on-demand educational resources is really critical. I think doing mentorships is really important to engineers that are looking to advance, what it means to be, more DevOps minded. Right. But the structured training, the in-person training, the online training that's led from an organizational change perspective, still critical. It's still the number one feedback item that we have as far as how people like to learn. And we've done quite a bit there, and it's been pretty successful.
Awesome. Okay, I'm trying to look at some of the other questions.
I love that you see the questions that I don't, so this is fun for me.
Well, I'm picking and choosing, so I'm seeing what I'm interested in, right? So let's talk a little bit about tooling, maybe that we haven't gone too far into tooling. So there's a question around is most of your tooling that you've been rolling out SaaS or on premise, right? And maybe talk a little bit about some challenges or process, because we talked a little bit about, because groups were siloed and in different stages, you had a lot of tools, and some of the benefit you need to get to have fewer tools for each type of need.
Yeah, so it depends. We run a combination of things in our hybrid cloud environment. We still run some things on-prem in our data centers. We still run some of these platforms in our public cloud providers. Some of those are installed as infrastructure service that we manage the platform on top of. Other pieces of the tooling and platform are SaaS offerings that are provided. One of the things that we really try to do over the last couple of years is consolidate those down wherever possible so we can accelerate, what we need to invest in. And I think we're at a place now where we've done a lot of that work. And I think like anyone else, we're trying to understand what truly is a commodity. What can we just buy and leverage and integrate with? What do we need to add additional value on top of that? We need to maintain a platform a little more control of, and what that balance is. I think we've got some really good approaches to that, from everything from what we're thinking on our source code repositories all the way through the technologies that do the build and deployment, and some of the platforms that our runtimes run in. So it's across the gamut there. I would say, like anyone else, we probably are looking for someone else to run things that they're better at than we are. But we're pretty damn good at what we do too. So it's a nice balance between where's that line and when do we transition, and how does that line up with regards to all the things. So it's a balancing act, but we want to move more towards commodity in a lot of those spaces, and it's just going to take some time to do that. And there's trade-offs along the way there.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like tooling, especially in a leadership position, is one of the biggest challenges, right? Because there's always the new shiny toy, right? And folks come with the new shiny toy, and you've already spent all the time integrating and instrumenting the existing technology, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about, I know from my personal experience how I approach this, but maybe you could talk a little bit about, there is, especially today, I always say the only thing consistent in technology is, I don't think it's consistent in the world is change, and in technology, it's just faster, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk a little bit and how you sort of, evaluate new technologies and how you decide whether it's worth it to invest in, and do you have to retire existing ones, or how do you approach that?
Well, everybody promises they can retire all the things. I don't see it very often.
Always.
I would say it comes down to one, how does this fit with our enterprise architecture holistically? Is this in alignment with where we're at and where we're going? I think two, it's really a combination of what our current state needs are, and is this helping solve for a need above and beyond is it just something we want? So where's the need at for that? And three, is it cost effective? Is it something that really makes sense for where we're at and where we're trying to get to? But we're approaching everything from a very productized API strategy perspective. So, is this something that has a rich set of APIs that we can integrate with so that, when the next shiny thing that comes along, which hopefully is shiny and adds business value, we can move to the next thing because we've integrated it in a way that we're leveraging the API and we're getting the value out of it. I think we're coming a long way from we buy a technology and we heavily invest in wrapping that technology and tightly coupling ourselves like any other software development team, right? We need to make sure that we're staying decoupled where we can and tightly coupling where it makes sense, which is getting rarer and rarer. But that API integration is really, really key, and how we manage that relationship with that product and that company. So for me, that's really the keys. And without getting too much into the specific tech stack or anything like that, I think that's the best way to answer it for right now.
And did you like have that from the beginning, that like API first sort of strategy for the glue between the components, or did you try and do some first and sort of, learn your lesson the hard way and move towards that?
Yeah, some of our key platforms are have been around for a while. We've been investing in this space for quite some time. Even before we rallied around like a DevOps culture change, a lot of the tools and technologies were, at least in some frame, in existence, right? So we've extended and amended and really pushed out the capabilities there. But for the most part, we've really just tried to further that along and make sure that we're getting the most value out of what we have based on the investments we've made. Just over the last couple of years, we've really talked more about that API product mindset and how that ties back and how we can start, extracting ourselves from being tightly coupled with these solutions, understanding that at times you need to be, and other times you don't. So that's been probably over the last year and a half that we've really looked at it from a CI/CD software delivery platform perspective. And I think that's going to set us up for future success as new capabilities and new technologies come out that we're going to need to integrate with.
Yeah, I think it's everything's a balance, right? Everything in moderation, including moderation. I think pragmatic is the best thing you can do, and know that it's, what it looks like today is not going to look like in 6 months. And there is no perfect solution there, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so I think this is an interesting question. Because we all know going on these big sort of epic journeys, transformations, right? There's times where the teams feel like they're losing momentum, they're losing motivation, right? They're getting stuck. What has been some of your strategies or approaches when maybe your team or maybe some of the teams that are going through this to help them sort of reignite and get unstuck and move forward?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is making sure they're trying on the perspective of the customer or their peer or their partner organization that's getting value out of what they're doing. So a lot of times we get stuck and siloed and, what is it that we're doing and what specifically do we need to get better at? And you can always take it. You can always make it better and better and better. And I think the one thing that I try to do and I try to, encourage others to do is try on the perspective from your customer. What are they seeing in the value that you're doing? I think we're doing a better job of bringing our customer in to talk to the team about why the work they're doing is valuable and what they're getting out of it. But that goes a really long way. What perspective does someone else have about what you're doing? And honestly, just saying thanks and good job and really meaning it. A lot of people put in a lot of work and tying it back to how they're making a difference. I think we're doing a much better job tying what we're doing day in and day out to like business outcome and business goals and how we're being productive from that perspective. That's a long way to go, right? Tying it from an engineer on a back-end platform team and how that's helping the business. But we're doing a much better job at that, or at least we're trying really hard and the teams are seeing that. But being candid about what's working and what's not, I think we sometimes have to take a step back and make sure that we're not just pushing the next outcome, the next thing, right? It's historically pretty prevalent in technology and IT everywhere. sometimes you just have to talk about how much better we were now than we were a month ago or a year ago. So we've been doing some look backs here recently, and kind of talked a little bit about the quarterly to monthly to daily to, it used to need overnight builds, and then you needed a lunch break for a build, and then you needed a coffee break, and now builds are taking minutes. So we've come a really long way. I think the capabilities in this space have come a really long way. And sometimes it's just good to take a step back and acknowledge that, knowing that there's always going to be pressure to get better and do better. But we've come a far way, and we're pretty good at what we do. And I think it's good for people to hear that.
No, I love that. I think all of those things are things I've recommended, right? Telling the team, like, when the road ahead still seems really long and hard, like turning around and looking back at where you came from, right? And how much progress you've made. And I love the idea of that empathy. And I think especially folks more on the, classically operations side or SREs or infrastructure, they're even further removed than the folks necessarily doing product or application development. So helping them be exposed to their customers, which, as you said, may be internal, colleagues, and helping them understand the impact and the empathy, right, for how much they're improving those folks' life. I love that. I love that idea. I think that's a great way to sort of bring those groups together to help understand that they're not working in this black box, and that their work actually has impact that can even eventually be tied to, right, the external customers and users.
Yeah,
maybe how did you do that?
Say that again, sorry.
Yeah, maybe how did you set up some of those groups to share that perspective and impact?
I'll just say internally to my own team, right, who runs a lot of the pipelines and platforms to build, deploy, manage, integrate, et cetera, the workload. Over the last 3 years on the journey we've had, that's been hard, but it's just having those conversations and bringing in my peers that are in the markets talking about what's working well and what's not. A lot of times, we don't want to talk about what we're good at, or we're focused on the next thing because it's not good enough. And so anytime lately I've heard my peers talk about what they think we're doing well, I'll ask them to come in and tell my team that. Like, we need to hear it from you and why you think we're doing well. I think that's the big thing. Asking for your peers and your customers to come in. We're seeing more and more the desire to do that because the acknowledgement of we're in this together. No matter where you're at in the organization, we're in this together. This is a shift. We're moving together. We're going to be successful together. So sharing that feedback has been really helpful. And we just have to do more of it. We have to do more of it.
Well, Justin, thank you so much for your time. I always love swapping war stories and talking about challenges with fellow technical leaders out there. Thank you for having Stack Overflow for Teams be part of your journey. We're really proud of being a part of the journey and the success you've had. And thanks to everyone who attended the webinar. I hope this was valuable and useful, and maybe you took a couple nuggets away. Maybe you're going to go back and start a book club on some books that you're trying to transform, or start to roll out Stack Overflow for Teams in your organization. But we really appreciate you being here. We hope you had value, and thank you everyone so much.
Thanks.